Greetings. This is Management 431. This lecture is for Chapter 12, Managing Workforce Flow. We've spent time in class to date understanding how do we attract, how do we source, attract, and select the right applicants and candidates for our jobs. And so where we're at right now is in managing our workforce flow. So how do we deal with our employees once they are in the organization? And while there's lots of things that we need to deal with, what I'm specifically addressing is how do we make sure that we do a good job of retaining those employees? How do we socialize them so they can be a better part of our organization, integrated well? And if we need to fire them, what are some of the things that we need to know about how to lay off or let go of employees based on that? So that's what we will be spending time on with this lecture. Our learning objectives for this chapter are as follows. Number one, we're going to look at how we can help make socialization and the socialization process more effective. Step one, we do recruiting. Step two, we do selection. Step two, we make our hiring decision. And then once that person accepts the job offer, we need to get them integrated and up to speed as quickly as possible. The better job we do at socialization and training them on their job requirements, the more productive they will be and the greater return on investment we'll have for our selection system. We're also going to look at the different types of turnover and some of which we can manage and we can have an impact on as managers and organizations. So we'll look at those different kinds of turnover and what causes those different kinds of turnover and what we can do to impact that. We're going to talk about different strategies for retaining employees. So what do we do to minimize then the turnover when we can have an impact on turnover? We're going to look at downsizing options and the different ways that we can do downsizing. And then ultimately, how do we effectively terminate an employee? How do we make sure that we've done a good job of identifying who is not performing well and maybe needs more training, or who is violating the rules and policies and therefore will be let go because they're not following rules and policies. But whatever those are, we need to make sure that we have our plan set up so that we're adequately documenting what we need to on performance, and ultimately having a plan for how we terminate an employee properly and legally. So how quickly does it take for an employee to become productive? And it really depends on the job category. It's important to know that you're not going to have your employee be at full productivity as soon as they start the job. Even if you hire the best candidate with the most important skills, there is always going to be a learning curve for them. So it's important to be realistic. That it's going to take a while for people to adjust to the new job and the new things that they need to do. Obviously, the more experience people have, the easier it'll be, but that still doesn't mean that they're going to have an easy time of things. So it is important that we invest money and time into acclimating people, getting them oriented and up to speed on their job, and making sure they get all the training they need to be successful. Mid-level managers take up to 6 months to get up to speed on a job. And these are people that have years of experience and that they've been doing this stuff for a while. So 6 months to a year is not unreasonable to have someone really truly understand their job fully and be comfortable with it. And if you think about it this way, if you work in a place that has a year cycle for when things get done. I used to work in a bank where once a year we would contract with our auditing company. We brought in Marsh & McClellan, and what they would do is they would audit our books. And so I was responsible for making sure I brought in those people to audit our books on an annual basis. First time I did it, I clearly didn't know what I was asking, what I was looking for, but it took a year before I really experienced everything that I needed to do on the job and experienced it at least once. And so the year cycle for me, in my mind, even though I expect people to be pretty much up to speed by 3 to 6 months, it usually takes them a year to really feel like they're comfortable with their job and they're doing a good job because they've been able to experience all the cyclical things they would expect to experience in their job on a regular basis. Um, Restaurants and hotels, sometimes it takes up to 90 days for an employee to feel comfortable and settled in. Obviously, in a restaurant, they have to learn a menu, or they have to learn the service requirements. They have to know how to set tables, how to restock, how to do all those things. So they will follow somebody for a while, and then typically they will start to have their own responsibilities waiting on tables, and then ultimately after about 3 months they should be fully up to speed. That would be the goal, because most restaurant situations repeat themselves on a shorter time scale, right? I mean, the cycle for a bank is really different. You know, what you do on an annual basis at a bank is very different than a restaurant. In a restaurant, you basically cycle based on your, your daily work. And so within 3 months, you typically get the wide range of what you would normally expect in terms of service issues and concerns. At least that would be my experience anyway. External hires typically takes about 8 weeks for clerical jobs to be pretty up to speed on productivity issues, knowing where to go to get resources, who to talk to if they have a problem, how to go about and navigate, computer systems or technology. Usually about 20 weeks for higher level professionals, and then usually about 26 weeks, a half a year, 6 months easily for executives. So it does take a lot longer. The more knowledge you're expected to have, the more of a strategic impact you're going to have on the organization, the longer it takes for you to get to full productivity. Once your employee enters the organization, they've begun their first day, there are two major things that we need to be aware of. Number one is orientation or onboarding. How do we get them into the organization, completing all their paperwork, where their desk is, where their computer is, where their email is, what are the benefits, what are the policies, all those things that they need to do in the first couple of days. It can be very overwhelming. So we want to make sure we're not overwhelming somebody on their first day, pushing them to have tons of lessons and tons of notes and tons of lectures that they've got to listen to. We want to spread that out over time. So start with little by little over a period of time, getting them up to speed on just the rules and the policies and those basic things. Socialization then is the larger, more integrative process of getting someone up to speed on the company's culture and their norms and their expectations, the rituals. We socialize with them in a true sense of the word. Socialization means we spend time with them, we get to know them, we bring them to lunch, we engage in training sessions with them, and we talk about the company culture, and we share our stories, and we share our rituals, and so that people start to understand, what is it like to work in this company? It's not just what do I have to do my job, but what is it like every day to be in this company and to do this kind of work? The better the job we do with socialization, the easier it is for someone to be at their highest level of productivity. They can be at that level sooner, and they can make a contribution to the company's bottom line in providing a return on investment, if you will. So it's really important that from day one, we are socializing recruits from day one. As soon as we interact with them, as soon as we share with them what we are like as an employer, what our brand is and what our employer image is, that's the beginning of socialization. And we start there through the whole recruitment and selection process. Remember, people are looking for signals and signs about what they can expect when they work on the job. So again, we make sure we are treating people fairly during the recruitment and selection process, because that signals what it's like to work in our company. And then ultimately, as people enter, we now can more consciously and more focused approach to socialization, getting them up to speed on the norms and the rules and what it's like to work in this company, what life is like every day here. So again, the more that we invest up front in doing a good job, the easier it will be for us to get our return on investment downstream. We are more likely to have employees be engaged with the company. And so if they're more engaged, they're more likely to buy into the company's missions and visions and really work at their best. They're more likely to stay with the company. And so our goal is to make sure that people are knowledgeable about their job, knowledgeable about what their coworkers are doing. We want to make sure they're socialized in what they should do and how the company, functions on a daily basis. They tend to stay with the company longer. They're much more likely to be satisfied. They're more happy with their careers. There are so many wins. The research supports tremendous amount of win for any company that makes sure that they do a good job socializing someone and preparing them to be an effective employee, just in terms of job knowledge, but also an effective member of the culture and the company that they'll be working within. Table 12.1 from your textbook talks about socialization program choices. And there's a whole host of choices. You've got a one-time versus a staggered program. Basically, a one-time program puts newcomers through one long session versus smaller sessions. I always argue for staggered programs. I think those are better because people take little bites and it's easier to absorb when it's in smaller bites. But sometimes all you can do is one day, one large program. So be mindful of people's attention, keep them occupied, keep them engaged, keep them happy. Clearly with interacting with others and up and moving so that they're not getting bored and wanting to fall asleep. Collective versus individual programs. Programs that are collective programs put people through a common set of experiences versus one-on-one orientation or socialization programs. There are some advantages to both, but collective programs helps people get to know other people and across departments and build relationships, so there's advantages to that. Formal versus informal. Again, a formal program has a very clear set of guidelines and rules and a procedure that it follows versus an informal program. Smaller companies tend to have more informal programs where we take you out to lunch and we talk about what the job is, versus larger companies tend to have more formal programs. And so, again, there are pros and cons, but even in informal programs, there are important things you need to do to make sure that socialization is going to work well. Sequential versus random programs. Sequential programs are programs that require recruits to pass through a series of steps, step-by-step basis, like our multiple hurdle, right? Before you can do this, you have to do this. Before you can do the next thing, you have to be successful at this thing. And so, particularly when it's a very complex job with lots of different steps, you want to work incrementally from the early stages of what you want them to learn, what you want them to know about the company, and then you build onto bigger and greater things. So you might want to work on individual orientation, getting them settled in, then integrating with their group, then integrating with the larger social department and things like that. So there's lots of different things we can do around that. Fixed versus variable. Fixed programs provide newcomers with a fixed timetable associated with completing each stage and transition. And what that means is, as you're transitioning through your first year, your first few years, there's really clear steps that you have to take. It's a very fixed program. And again, that usually is associated with a more formal program. A variable program can be part of a formal program, but it is more likely to have no consistent timetable. And whenever you are ready, you move up to the next stage. It allows for a more organic nature of integrating you into the company. A tournament versus a contest program. Programs treating each socialization stage as an elimination tournament where failure means that a new hire is out of the company, versus a contest in which new hires build up a track record and a batting average over time. So a tournament basically means winner takes all. It becomes more competitive. And I struggle with those sorts of things, because if I'm going to go through the effort to hire somebody, the last thing I want is a tournament approach to things where I'm going to lose people who I've just invested a tremendous amount of money and time into to hire them. So I would much rather have a contest approach where the person who does well gets honored, gets rewarded, but we don't necessarily fire the people who don't go through as fast as the tournament winner, right? Serial versus disjunctive programs, programs using experienced organizational members as role models or mentors who groom newcomers. Those are the serial programs. Disjunctive programs are pretty much anybody who feels like volunteering this week can do it. You want a serial program more likely than not if you can. Obviously, smaller businesses may have more struggles finding somebody who's available regularly to do that sort of thing. But a serial program makes sure that we've got, good people that we can call upon to be good role models to help them with their integrating into the company and those sorts of things. Investiture versus divestiture programs. Investiture are programs that take advantage of a new hire's unique skills versus trying to deny or strip away personal characteristics. Investiture means we're integrating their skill set into the company. Divestiture means we're trying to separate their individuality and make them sort of part of the whole. And depending on what you're trying to accomplish in your socialization program, one or the other might be good. I'm still a huge proponent of the investiture approach, where we invest in them, we try to get them integrated, and we take advantage of what they have to bring to the table, versus trying to squelch their individuality. Effective socialization requires us to really proactively engage and involve our new employees in things that are going on, both professionally and interpersonally. Taking them out to lunch and doing things with them after work if that's feasible. Of course, that's not always feasible. Many people have, requirements and home requirements where they need to be home with kids or spouses. But if we can get them engaged as soon as possible, this encourages them to feel like they're a part of the company quicker than normal. It is the manager's job to really work and plan what that's going to look like. So we want to make sure that the manager is engaging with the coworkers, letting them know what they expect of them to help that new employee become socialized. Sometimes it's a good idea to pair your new employee with current employees on a temporary basis, where they can learn about the company. That's their touchstone, the person they can go talk to if they say, hey, where's the bathroom? Or hey, where's the copy paper? Or, how do I get this fixed if this is broken? Those kinds of things. And you basically want to look at engagement metrics and retention rates and supervisor satisfaction with that new employee as metrics to assess whether or not that person is engaged and more engaged in your socialization. So set some key metrics for yourself. Look at the 30-day retention, the 60-day retention, the 90-day retention, which is the 1, 2, or 3 month retention rates. If you're losing people in those first couple months, you are not doing effective socialization. So now that we understand some of the basics of socialization, now that our employee is working for us, how do we manage them the best on terms of a daily basis to minimize turnover, to maximize retention, to deal with our succession management plan once we have them embedded in the company? How do we redeploy them if we have problems with a department not performing well? Can we put people in different locations to maximize the use of their talent? So there's all sorts of things that we need to think about in terms of the flow of people through our company. And remember, when we did forecasting, we looked at those transition matrices, the matrix that said, you could be promoted, you could do a lateral transfer, you could be demoted, you could exit the company, you could just stay in your position. That's what we mean by the flow of work. So how do we assess, where we're at with people and how to figure out where they fit into that flow, and how do we manage them the best way possible? The first thing we want to focus on is turnover. And as you know, from Management 430, there are some types of turnover that we can control and some types of turnover that we cannot control. For example, if an employee is not performing well, we can try to train them, and if they don't respond to training, we can let them go. We control that. But if somebody has a spouse that moves to a foreign country and they're going to be traveling with them, we can't control that. There's nothing we can do to retain that person if they choose to not stay working for the company. So, voluntary turnover means a person chooses to leave due to personal or professional reasons. Now, it could be that they don't like the company, and there are probably things that we could do to impact voluntary turnover if we have not done a good job of socialization or training or treating people fairly. So there are other aspects of voluntary turnover that we cannot control. As I said, a sick relative, a sick child, family issues, travel issues with the families. That's how those things work out. Involuntary turnover is always from the perspective of the employee, where the employer initiates the separation due to poor performance or misconduct, or because the firm is being reorganized, a layoff. We control involuntary turnover. Okay, now mind you, we may have made mistakes that resulted in an employee with poor performance. We probably didn't do a good job of selecting the person. Again, selection is not a 100% perfect process. There is lots of error in selection. So there are other things that maybe, no matter how good of a job that we did, they met all the criteria, it still was not enough. This person had a barrier for being able to learn the new job, so therefore they couldn't do it. So but largely, involuntary turnover is under our control. Functional turnover is the departure of a poor performer, which means we want high levels of functional turnover if we have poor performers. Obviously, the better job we do in recruitment and selection and socialization, we're less likely to have problems with poor performers, but it doesn't eliminate it entirely. But we do want functional turnover. We want to lose our poor performers. What we don't want is dysfunctional turnover. We don't want good performers to leave. And sometimes dysfunctional turnover is coupled with problems that people have with the company because of professional issues. They didn't like the way they were treated, they didn't like their pay, they don't like their working conditions, whatever it might be. So dysfunctional turnover is when we have a problem with good performers who are leaving and it's outside of, and we can't convince them to stay, that they're unhappy with our company for a reason as part of their voluntary turnover, and they are leaving because they are unhappy with us. Avoidable turnover are things that we could have managed on our own, that we could have prevented. And unavoidable turnover is things that we could not have prevented. We couldn't prevent somebody getting sick. We couldn't prevent somebody's spouse from taking a job abroad. So there are some aspects of voluntary turnover that's avoidable and unavoidable, dysfunctional and functional. So there's all sorts of things that we should be considering on this and recognizing some of these things we control and some of these things we don't. Table 12.3 from the textbook looks at why top-performing employees leave an organization. So these are dysfunctional turnover and why they are leaving. So we want to be able to investigate, why are we losing our best people? So many times it is because of pay issues. So from this survey, the percent of top-performing employees' responses, that 71% said that it was pay. 45% of the employers said it was because of pay. So you can see there's an imbalance here between the perceptions of the employer, why people leave, and the perceptions of the employee, why they leave. So pay is really important to keep people. It doesn't keep them motivated, but at least it sets things on a level playing field, right? If you go back to the video on Daniel Pink and motivation, and motivation theories, autonomy, mastery, and purpose, and he talks about intrinsic rewards and how important they are, but you have to make sure your extrinsic rewards are done fairly, done well, and are satisfactory to people, because you can never impact intrinsic rewards if your extrinsic rewards are out of alignment. And so that's what you're seeing here. You're seeing the perception of management, that it's an issue of of assuming it's something else and not really recognizing that it's an issue of pay, that if they're not treating people fairly with respect to pay, they're not going to be able to retain them. And it doesn't matter all the other good things they try to do. If the pay's not there, it's challenging to keep them. The next most important thing that employees say is an issue is promotional opportunities. And clearly, if people don't have an opportunity for growth, they're not going to want to stay with the company. They might for a while because they want to get experience, but ultimately, if they're going to leave, they'll leave for a promotional opportunity elsewhere if none are presenting themselves in the organization they're in. Work-life balance, also an issue. How do I balance my private life and my professional life? Wanting to know that you can have time to relax when you're at home. It used to be when you left your work at 5 o'clock, you didn't have to think about your job until you walked in at 9 o'clock the next morning. But now with email, cell phones, text messaging, SMS, any online chats, intranets, you name it, the company expects you to be available to them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And for some people, that's okay. They don't mind because they expect that. But for other people, they want more balance in their life. So, balance, if that's important to you, is going to influence you to leave to find a place where you can have more balance. Stress. Obviously, stress may be related to the organization itself, or it may be just other stressors that are going on in the person's life. But I think this survey is primarily focused on what people are experiencing within the company. I mean, we all recognize that we have stress outside of our work life, but I think stress in this situation is really directed at the stress they feel in the job working for this particular company. Career development ties hand in hand with promotional opportunities. If you are not getting developed and there's no promotional opportunities, your motivation to stay and work well is going to be pretty low. And then, of course, healthcare benefits, which now basically is mandated, right? I mean, the Affordable Care Act says, we need to make sure we're providing healthcare benefits for people. But even then, for some companies, their healthcare benefits are still fairly slim, and the cost sharing for healthcare benefits can be pretty expensive. So sometimes if people are working for a company where they're not getting good benefits, they're going to leave for better benefits elsewhere. Everybody should have benefits, but oftentimes those benefits are not great. And so people will leave for benefits elsewhere. Now, from the employer's perspective, the highest thing that they believe is causing people to leave are promotional opportunities and career development. And so I think to some extent they're getting that. They're understanding that if they don't provide opportunities for people to develop and to grow and to be promoted, that's going to be a concern for them to retain people. That's always a concern. Even in the best of companies, there's only so many people that can be promoted, so many people that can advance through the company into smaller and smaller numbers as you move up the corporate hierarchy, right? You go from 100 employees and a handful of supervisors and a smaller handful of managers above that, and then your top management team above that. So your pyramid gets smaller at the top, so there are fewer opportunities for advancement as you move up the ladder. So that's fair. I think that they underestimate the role of pay, and they assume that people can do well on low pay. But if you look at all of the data on wages, on salaries and salary stagnation, salaries have not kept pace with the economy. And salaries of lower level employees have not kept pace with the salaries of upper level management. So it is important that we recognize that our lower level employees are not able to stretch their dollars as far. They are not as financially viable as they were 25 or 30 years ago because people, the median income hasn't really gone up over time. And that's a concern if the cost of living has gone up tremendously. So people now can do less with the same amount of money. Lastly, they minimize stress and they minimize the issue of healthcare benefits, and I think that is problematic for employers. So it's really important. I think this table is really telling about how we as an organization need to really rethink what we do for our employees and why, so that we don't lose them to other opportunities. This is just the remaining part of that table. I'm not sure why our textbook people sort of separated this into two separate tables and two separate pages and slides. But if you look at employees' responses, again, as it gets smaller and smaller, the length of commute sometimes is challenging, the nature of work is challenging, retirement benefits is challenging, company culture, and then the relationship with the supervisor. And so I think that the employer puts a lot more weight on the relationship with the supervisor as the reason why people leave and not really looking at their own policies and procedures. I think that's sort of the larger lesson to get from both of these slides, 1 and 2, recognizing that we underestimate what our policy decisions, what impact it has on people. So what are some of the best ways we can identify turnover causes? Number 1, exit interviews. Always a good way. You sit down with your employee and you ask them, why are you leaving? They may not tell you the truth. If this is somebody in HR asking them the question, you may be more likely to get an honest response if you contract with an external consultant to do that work, and so that at least the information is anonymous, so that we don't have a sense of what are the reasons why people are leaving, and then we can trace it back to a particular employee who's saying, I don't like this manager, the department sucks, the pay is awful, and then we could leave ourselves open for retaliation. So we do want to have it compiled and sent to us in an aggregate format, and we don't want to be the ones actually engaging in the exit interviews ourselves. In my mind, that's what I believe. And another way we can figure out things is employee satisfaction surveys. And what we want to do is have these satisfaction surveys out there so we can identify a problem in advance, not after the fact. Exit interviews are after the fact, but in satisfaction surveys can help us identify the issues up front before they become an issue.